where we are going to explore your reporting solutions and why I think some of them should be replaced with dashboards. Being a former arts student, I've written a bit of a thesis statement for today's presentation. So by explaining some of the key differences between dashboards and reports and showing some real-world examples of where I believe a dashboard should have been used, my goal is to make a compelling case for the inclusion of dashboards in your organization. So how will I accomplish this? First of all, I'd like to talk a bit about who you are and some of your common challenges. So I have a very specific target audience in mind for today's presentation. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, build on what Slava has told you about me, and try and build a case for why you should pay attention to the things I'm saying today. I'm going to illustrate the typical differences between dashboards and reports. This is a pretty challenging topic because, number one, there's a lot of overlap between the two technologies, and number two, there are a lot of cases where either a dashboard or a report could come into play. But what I'd like to do is sort of set the playing field in terms of generally there are some differences between the two technologies, and based on that make a case for where a dashboard could come into play. And then I'm going to draw on some very specific examples from my career. I'll talk to you a bit about a company I worked for that was engaged in transportation of goods between locations. I'll talk about being lent out to a sales and marketing team within a very large organization and the reports I built for them. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about education dashboards. And this is going to be quite interesting actually because I'm going to show you some real-world data. These are some publicly available reports that I've built in my past, and they're still up and viewable. So yep, some good real-world samples here to build on. Okay, so who are you? You might be relying on some static reports to get your metrics in the hands of key stakeholders. You might be building them in Excel or Access or something like Oracle reports, sending them out in PDF or paper form. You might be looking to replace a manual or ad hoc reporting process with an automated one. Very often these types of reports are cranked out by hand by some poor employee like myself in my past, and that's just time that could be better spent in other places. You might be building a data warehouse or just completed a data warehouse and are now turning your eye towards the presentation layer now that we have all this good and extracted, transformed, loaded data. How are we going to get this out to our consumers? And this is a surprising one because I hear this very, very frequently, where the company has been focused on, there are so many errors in our manual process, there are so many errors in our collection process, let's clean that all up. And then they have not put any thought into, okay, well, how are we going to get this out into the hands of people who need to make decisions? And finally, there's quite a large group, and up until the point I joined on this dashboard, I was included in this group, people who are new to the concept of dashboards and some of the ways that they can be used for a company and the role that they play in the business intelligence stack. So quite a few companies that I speak to fall into this broad category. I spoke to a company 2 days ago. Their CEO, at the beginning of every month, is printing out a report in Excel and taking those pieces of paper and attaching them to bulletin boards around the factory. This is not a unique problem. This happens quite frequently. So what are the challenges of reports in some of the formats that I've just described? Well, first of all, there's a delayed time to action. Whether you're having to wait for the report to be published or having to wade through a very dense report full of content to find the numbers that are applicable to you, there's a lag between the business event and the decision based on that event. And there are ways to decrease that delay using some dashboards. Many reporting processes are done on an ad hoc basis, or they involve hands on a keyboard. Someone has to get in, extract the data, prep a spreadsheet. Even the best Excel spreadsheet needs to be tweaked before it's ready to be published. Those hands on the keyboard mean potential errors introduced by the development process. Also, as I mentioned, there's a real cost to a company to have a resource tied up at the beginning of every month following a very repetitive process to create these reports and publish them. Let's automate that. Let's take that time and repurpose it to something a lot more productive. And finally, lack of visual clarity. A lot of reports, they're just not designed for the end purposes that they're being put towards. let's look at some ways that we can use some visualizations. Let's use some charts and graphs. Let's use some state indicators. Let's use some clever techniques that we can visualize the data rather than looking at raw tabular format. All of this adds up to simply not being on target. A lot of reports are just, they're not being designed for the purpose that they are being used for. So very briefly, who am I? This is me, looking happy and handsome. Honestly, this picture was taken on my wedding day, so I better look happy. And as Slava said, I've bounced around quite a bit in my career. I'm married to a scientist who travels the globe, so although that does not do much for a long-term commitment to a job, it does mean I've had great exposure in a number of different industries, and you can see them here. And I've spent the last 12 months with Dundas Dashboard as a solutions architect, and I've spoken with over 150 clients who are either looking for or just recently purchased some dashboard software and are looking for some guidance in terms of how do I implement this, where should I be focusing my effort. So I've seen a few things, I've built a few reports, and I'd like to share some of that experience with you. So here's where I'm going to start. I want to tell you what the two different mediums are, who you would be targeting these particular dashboards or reports at, and why you might consider one over the other. So on the screen, we have a report on the left-hand side and a dashboard that we've created here at Dundas Dashboard on the right-hand side. So QED, right? Problem solved. These are the two things. Go out and make some decisions. If only it were that easy. So let's know our medium. These are some general guidelines. Now, as I said at the top of the webinar, there's some pretty significant overlap between the two mediums and some of the things they're used for. So I'm going to speak generally. There are exceptions to every rule, and these are no exception to that rule. So generally, a report is primarily text and table based. So this is something, Excel spreadsheets, you know them, you've seen them. Lots of tables, lots of figures, maybe the occasional chart or graph here, but mostly we're looking at a text-based printout. Whereas on the dashboard side, we're using visualizations, we're using those charts and graphs, we're focusing on them as a way to drive the user's eye and the user's brain towards the decision points, as opposed to having them wade through text and tables. And even on the dashboard, there are some cases where you might want to include some text or a table. Like, for example, scorecards are very popular. Scorecards are a great use of dashboards, and there's a pretty heavy text-based component to many scorecards. Generally, reports are pretty lengthy, spanning multiple pages. You know, this is kind of a legacy of where reports have been coming from. You know, we might be adhering to our transactional data structure. We might be just, because the process is sometimes so manual, it's just, you know, what's the minimum amount of effort to get the maximum amount of reward. So we could be looking at multiple pages. We might be looking at a book, for example. Whereas on a dashboard, our goal is to get all of that content onto a single screen. There are ways to use some of those visualizations to condense the information and still drive the decision without overwhelming the eye with content and with detail. Generally, reports are pretty static. Now, Excel users, you're going to say, what about things like filters? You know, what about things like adding annotations, for example? There are ways to add some interactivity to a report, and that's fine. But primarily, they're there to be viewed. They're there to be analyzed. Whereas a dashboard, many of them focus on an interactive component. Let's allow our users to drill to some detail. Let's allow our users to make some selections to hone in on the information that they're most focused on. Now, this point is, of the challenging ones, this is the most challenging one for me, because I don't believe every dashboard needs to be interactive, and I don't believe every report needs to be static. But these are just some general guidelines to guide your thoughts. Generally, reports are designed for in-depth analysis and study. You know, these are things where we're gonna follow a process. We're gonna crank this out once a month. We're gonna put this into the hands of our team and have them, you know, work towards their own decisions. Whereas on a dashboard, we want to make sure we've summarized the information as much as we can to provide at-a-glance monitoring and decision-making. This is about saving our analysts and our executive team's time with regard to, they don't have to spring up their own trends. We're going to do it for them. And finally, reports, generally, they're published on a schedule, something you're going to do once a month or once a quarter, or they're prepared on an ad hoc basis where a team is embarking on a new project, or there's just not anything supporting some decisions that need to be made. So let's contact IT and get them to crank through our data and spit out some spreadsheets for us. Whereas a dashboard is something you're going to want to spend a lot of time designing. You're going to want to spend time, really honing in. These are the metrics I need to monitor, and we're going to make that available on a persistent basis, where the only restriction in terms of analysis is your data refresh cycle. So notice I use generally, and I put it in italics. As like I said, there's so much overlap, but there are some real key differences in the general cases that I think make a compelling case for why you would consider a dashboard over a report. Okay, so who is involved in a dashboard? Let's know our audience. So I'm going to split it into two broad groups. Now, remember, we're speaking generally here. Generally, reports are targeted towards analysts and number crunchers, and also, your executive group could be included in this group as well. But it's people who are going to have the time and leisure and know-how to do that analysis, to spring out the trends, to spring out the information, to wade through page after page of data and focus in on the information that's most relevant to them. Whereas on the dashboard side, we're going to target it towards those executives. We're going to target towards decision makers. And I put an or here because my third example is something completely different. It's targeted towards a broader audience. They don't have the background knowledge for analysis. They don't have the ability to go through a report and spring out what they're looking for. So we're going to create some dashboards that are going to summarize all that information very neatly and drive their processes for them. So let's know our subject matter. So why would you use one of the two? And I've summarized this to basically one point, is that generally a report is there to inform your decisions. So allow you to do that analysis that I've talked about and come up with your own decision. Whereas a dashboard, it's not decision informing, it's decision driving. On a dashboard, we're going to do all the work. We're going to target our visuals squarely at our key performance indicators, the metrics that are driving our business forward, and we're going to use that to make decisions instantly, as opposed to doing the analysis to come to them. So I've done my best to sum this up to a single line. So ask your organization the following question. When you're looking at a report, or you're looking at your source data, or you're looking at your needs, is there a way that these data can be summarized and expressed visually to better drive our decision-making process? So this is sort of a paraphrase of some of the experts in the field. Stephen Few comes to mind in his 2006 book. He makes a point around this, but this is something that I've put together to kind of paraphrase that. And in one single question, can we use that to drive our process towards a dashboard instead of a report? So that's the key differences, and now I'm going to go on some examples. So as I mentioned at the top of the call, these are actual reports that I've prepared in my 15 years in this space. For the first and second examples, I've adhered to the business case, but I've protected my legal interest here by obscuring the company and the subject matter so that nobody can come after me and say I'm sharing trade secrets. And the third example, I was overjoyed to find that the report is still live and available, and I actually reached out to the organization, and they have allowances for people like myself to use their data for analysis and presentation. So that's great. We'll be looking at some real live reports in the dashboard that I've decided to replace them with. So for each sample, I'm going to briefly introduce the company and the business need that drove them to a report. I'm going to show you that report, and I'm going to show you how it was used. And then I'm going to make a case for replacing that report with a dashboard. And I'm actually going to show you a sample of what I came up with in terms of a dashboard. Now these are just samples. There are a million different ways these things could look, but this is something I decided to come up with pretty quickly, pretty rapidly, and show you an example. So example number one, back in the foggy history of 1998, this was my first internship at college, and I was engaged as a data entry clerk for a commercial shipping company. This is a company that had a large fleet of ships that were crossing the oceans and loading and unloading cargo. And my job was to input the captain's logs into our database every morning. Now, because I had spent my youth honing my quote, data entry skills, it would typically take me 1 or 2 hours every morning to input these logs, leaving me with 6 or 7 hours to start asking painful questions like, what are we using these logs for? So I'm spending 2 hours every morning doing this, and you're paying me to do it. What is the result of this? Who's using this and when and why? So I found out that basically it was at the end of every year where one of our analysts would audit the performance of our ships and our ports. So we were trying to figure out for each ship, how long was it taking them to unload our cargo when it arrived, and then how long was it taking us to reload our cargo. And then at each port, there were certain activities going on at that port that delayed these activities and delayed them to the point where we were allowed to claw back money from them when we performed our audit. So this was done, as I said, at the beginning of the year, and the frequency of this audit was not driven by any business need. It was driven by the fact that it took this poor guy 6 weeks to do it at the beginning of every year. So he just basically, pretty much took January and half of February off and went home and just sat with his Excel spreadsheets and did the best he could to come out with some results. He manually calculated the relevant metrics after the report was published just based on the format of the report. And he analyzed the results and issued those reports internally to some of the other analysts and then issued the corrected charges to the ports. So this is what the report looked like when I started. And as I said, I've protected the company, so now we're looking at fleets from Starfleet. We're looking at ships from Starfleet and different star bases around the galaxy. So we're looking at, basically, these are the raw transactional captain's logs. And he would print out 518 pages of these in January and take them home and try and spring out the relevant counts and amounts. So what was he looking for? Activities like this. So these were the types of things where we've got a crew delay, where we're basically sitting in the port and waiting for somebody to show up and take away their goods. Or we have a situation where we've arrived at the port and there's nowhere for us to park, basically. So these are the types of things. There's a real bottom line impact to our dollars because of these activities. And the other thing we were looking for was our unloading and unloading times. So we were trying to go through these rows and figure out, okay, for this particular trip, it took 10 hours to unload the boat, and then it took another 10.5 hours to load the boat afterwards. So basically, he was going through this and manually scrubbing it and coming out with the numbers that he needed to do. So at the time, I didn't know much about, well, I mean, anything, to be quite honest, but I did the best I could in Excel and came up with something like this, where each row is a trip. Each row is a ship's complete activity from one port to another. And I gave him the load and unload times per trip. And then if there were delays, I put them in a separate column as well. So now he could start going in Excel and using some filters and use some formulas to come up with some averages and some totals that he could then use in his audit reports. But it took 512 pages and down to 80. And that's still a lot of work. This is still, I might have saved them 2 weeks. I wasn't there for very long, but I kept in touch with them and found out they were still using it after I left. So, like getting back to the business case, like why would I want to use a dashboard for this? Well, let's go back to the items I listed. Basically, he was auditing the performance of our ships and the ports they visited. Well, an audit is reactive. Monitoring would be proactive. I was putting that data in every single day, and it was relevant as soon as it was entered. So let's get that into the hands and under the eyes of the people that need this to drive some decisions. Maybe instead of waiting till the end of the year, we could get on the phone that day and find out what's going on and what needs to be done in order to make our company more money. Why was he manually calculating the relevant metrics? The business rules were very clear. The KPI, the key performance indicators, were very well defined. We knew what we were looking for. So why spend 6 weeks massaging the data? Automate that process and then monitor it. And finally, I mean, direct bottom line impact on the company performance. These were not trivial amounts of money. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars we were clawing back at the end of every year, simply because we just didn't have the know-how in terms of putting the report together. So let's turn that into a dashboard. So let's ask the question, is there a way that these data can be summarized and expressed visually to better drive our decision-making processes? And I believe absolutely yes. So let's focus on those key business drivers. Let's focus on the load times and the unload times and the delays that are occurring at each port. So this is the sample dashboard that I came up with. So instead of an annual audit, this is something that I'm expecting every analyst to have up on their computer screens every single day. So this is for the date of January 23rd, where on the left-hand side, we now have a list of every single ship that this analyst is in charge of monitoring and booking the cargoes for. So you can see, what are the average load times? What was the last load time? Maybe that last load was so lengthy it's worth sending an email and finding out what happened, or actually calling the captain and saying, hey, what's going on? Call the USS Venture and say it took 14 hours, what happened? And then a high-level trend. So maybe that USS Venture there, we can see that our loading times are steadily getting higher and higher. Maybe let's find out what's going on. Is there a crew problem? Is there a mechanical problem? Be a little more active. On the right-hand side, now we're looking on a port-by-port breakdown. So there's 5 ports that our cargoes are bouncing between. What are my year-to-date and month-to-date delays? And then I'm using an interesting little visual on the right-hand side to show you for the last 20 berths which activities had a delay. That's what that big red X is. And you can see for Deep Space Nine, the last 6 loading or unloading activities have had delays. So that's something we would want to get on the phone and address immediately. Are you overbooked? Is your crew not working? Do I need to start rerouting my cargoes to a different port? That kind of thing. And then recent delays, just showing you maybe the last 5 delays, just so the analyst has an idea of what's going on out there. What are the last 5 things that happened? We got a mechanical failure here at the Pelios station. Maybe we should be rerouting our ships. And down on the bottom, we're just looking for some trends in terms of, we've got a selector there where we can go ship by ship and find out, how are its loading and unloading times stacking up against our fleet averages. And this is the type of thing we'd use in a crew audit maybe. The rest of the fleet is pulling its weight, what's going on your vessel. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got some delays by, we're breaking down our delays by type and by location. So you can see at the Remler array, we've got a pretty significant set of delays there waiting for somewhere to unload our cargo. So this might mean they're overbooked or their processes are a little messy. Maybe we should get on the phone to them. So this is something that we're going to use daily. We're not going to wait till the end of the year to claw back the money. We're going to be more proactive in terms of we've already identified places where we can get some of our money back, and we're going to be active in terms of avoiding situations where we're spending money unnecessarily. So that's example number 1, turning an annual audit into a daily performance monitoring dashboard. That's kind of an unfair one because it wasn't a super well thought out report, but it's honest, it happened, and it's something that absolutely can be avoided. Example number 2, early 2000s, I was working in a statistical analyst department, and I got lent out to our marketing team who was producing a target market report. Basically, they had decided, our executives had decided, look, there's a segment of our business that is more profitable than the rest, just based on its demographic makeup, and we should be targeting them, both for our recruitment activities, for our upsell activities. So these are the core clients that we're going to use. And it turned out that this was not at all our target. They were nowhere near the most profitable, but that's a little outside the scope of what I'm talking about here. This is more about what the report was, what it was being used for. So I got involved not for my sales savvy or my marketing expertise. It was basically, well, Ricky's good at Excel. He can help us out. Oh boy, great, there goes my workload. So and now I'm being lent out to a department I don't know much about, just based on my technical aptitude. Good times. So what was the report for? At the beginning of every month, we were doing an audit of our marketing and sales initiatives. There were certain activities that our staff was undertaking out in the field to try and pull in these target clients and turn our existing clients into target clients. It was published every month by me. It took me 6 days to do. I had to manually extract the data from, I think it was business objects at the time, where I was just cranking out reports and then putting them into an Access database, and then finally having to pull that into Excel to do some final manipulation. It was a mess, and it was very painful. And I hear processes like this over and over while I'm talking to our existing and potential clients. So this report finally, it went to our CEO and all of the other C-level executives, and then all the regional managers, and then they shared it out with their under managers. So there were a lot of people with eyes on this report, and they were using it to drive decisions around our marketing spend and our advertising campaigns and the performance of our sales staff. So this is pretty weighty subject matter here, all being driven by this report. So what they did was they decided, okay, well, we've got 4 main regions that we focus on, so let's break out the data by our regions. And there are 3 criteria that we're using to evaluate our target market, basically. How many products they're going to purchase, whether or not they're loyal to us, and the only way that we could measure that was by enrolling them in our loyalty program. That turned on a flag in our database, basically. And then finally, we decided that this particular age group was the most stable client. They're not going to cost us too much in terms of support or expenses or whatnot. So the first set of numbers there and the first 2 numeric columns are basically this month. For our new business, how many of the accounts did we bring in that met each of the criteria, and then the percentage of the total new business. So you can see, for the Northwest region, we brought in 200 target clients, and they account for 15.6% of the new business that we got in that region for the month. And then the second set of columns is, okay, now let's look at our whole book, holistically, including that new business. So how many accounts do we have in our entire book, and how many of them both adhere to the individual criteria and then fit the target client. So the target client is the intersection of the 3 above criteria. And there's some interplay between those regions that isn't demonstrated at all in this report. What if I have clients, can I tell how many clients have purchased 2 products, but they're not a rewards member? It's very difficult to identify that here. And finally, the last 4 numeric columns are our attempt at a trend, where somehow you're supposed to be able to look at this row after row of numeric columns here and pull out the trends. Which criteria are we on an upswing for? Which regions are on an upswing? And it's not at all intuitive. So that was the actual report. Now let's do our best to make a case for a dashboard. Basically, what was the report for? Well, it was a quarterly audit. But it's much too high to inform decisions. Like, there's just not enough content here. There was lots of content in the database, but it was already taking me 6 days to build even that view. There was too much of a wait. They couldn't wait for me to say, okay, well, if I provided this and this and this, okay, well, now we're going to be able to drill in a little deeper. 6 days of the 20 working days in a month is 30% of my working time with the company focused on this single report. And remember, I'm not even a part of that department. So now that's 30% of my time that's being taken away from my actual job, what I was hired for. That adds up over a year, and that adds up over the number of ad hoc reports that are being produced by this company and maybe your company. So that's actually, the cost of labor is absolutely something worth looking at when it's this significant. Same in the first example. The business rules were very clear. We knew what we needed to do. The KPI were very well defined. We knew how to influence our bottom line results. Why don't we automate this? Why don't we do something a little more proactive and monitor our results? And again, direct bottom line impact on company performance. If the target market had been correctly defined, and as I said, that's a little beyond the scope of what I'm talking about today, we could use the dashboard to paint a real comprehensive picture of our business goals and the actions that we are taking out in the field to accomplish them. So let's ask our core question. Is there a way that I can take these data and summarize and express them to better drive our decision-making processes? Absolutely. So I took a little different approach. Rather than focusing on the regional structure, I put a dashboard together that's focused on actionable goals. So goal number 1, are we out there day-to-day recruiting the right clients? Goal number 2, are we upselling our clients? Are we continually getting them to purchase more products? And finally, are we keeping them long-term? Are we enrolling them in our loyalty rewards program? And then are we doing what we need to do to keep them in that program? And our company belief is that we can accomplish all 3 of our goals. We're going to make more money. We're going to do better out in the workspace. So, oh geez, I've got a little bit of a technical hang up here. Let's see if I can get that slide up and running for you again. So what I've done is I've adapted a sample that we have on our website, donethis.com, and it was targeted at we took part in a telco campaign a few months ago. And I repurposed that dashboard for my usage here. So you can see we now have, across the left-hand side of the screen, we have our 3 goals. We're focusing our goal number 1, focus our recruitment on our target client. Goal number 2, increase the portfolio size per client. I've restated it a little bit to try and make it a little more meaningful to the business user. And finally, we need to increase our subscription in the loyalty rewards program. So for each of these goals on the left-hand side, nice, big, bold, beautiful. I'm drawing the attention to this is how we did last month. 16% of our new clients fit our target market. We're up 4% year to date, and then we've got a little indicator of over the last 4 quarters, are we heading up, are we heading down? So this is great news from an overall company perspective. Our C-level executive, that regional breakdown that I have on the right-hand side, they don't care. That's not super relevant. They're looking at overall what's going on for the company. So then I took that demographic split and I made a new business focus here with this little line chart. So you can see there are 3 criteria that make up our target market. For each individual criteria, how are we doing in recruiting the new business over the last 4 quarters? And then the next 2 charts are just some context in terms of, okay, so we're out there recruiting the new business. Are we selling them enough, and are we keeping them happy with their service calls during the first 3 months of their membership in our program? So providing a little more context than the original report. And as I said, the data was there. It just was not feasible for me to be embedding this kind of data at the beginning of every month. Goal number 2, increasing that portfolio size. You know, we've got a nice high. We're plus $6 per client over the year to date. So that, you know, it's about 10% of the average portfolio. That's great to see. We have 2 different lines of business, postpaid and prepaid clients, so you know, maybe we're going to split that out a bit and see if it's relevant. We have 3 main products, our voice, our data, and our add-ons, and now we can see the overlap, you know, a good half of our book, and we're steadily increasing that overlap between the 3 products. So, you know, a little more information, a little more business driving context in terms of, you know, the upselling activity that we're taking out in the field. And at the bottom, goal number 3, we need to get our customers into our loyalty rewards program. This is the type of thing that's going to help keep us happy, keep them engaged long term, basically keep their money coming into our company. So although we're doing okay on our monthly upsell, you can see that line chart down at the very left-hand bottom corner of the screen that we're actually trending downwards in our subscriptions overall. And actually compared to our competition in the space, you know, maybe we've gone out and retrieved some publicly available data. You can see we're actually right at the very bottom in terms of what's going on out there. So this is a decision driver. Something needs to happen. You know, holistically from a company perspective, we need to rethink how we're recruiting people into our loyalty rewards. And then just a few metrics around the things that we're trying to do to keep them enrolled and keep them with us long term. And on the right-hand side, this is our appeal to our regional managers. Is that regional breakdown? As I said, it's not super relevant from a top-level perspective, but as we start to move down the food chain in terms of decision-making and decision power, it's going to be relevant for each of the 4 regions. You know, what is my overall trend in terms of our target market? So we've taken that original report. We've repurposed it towards our key stakeholders, which is those C-level executives, and given them enough information to be able to, you know, pick up the phone and actually drive some activity towards increasing these numbers. So in my mind, a very great and pretty elegantly stated use of a dashboard where a report was just not up to snuff. So our final example is from the world of advanced education. So from 2006 through 2008, I worked at the Ministry of Advanced Education for the province of British Columbia, which they pretty humbly proclaim is the best place on earth. So in order to use their information, I have to share this legal mumbo-jumbo with you that although they do provide this information publicly, I don't have any official status with the government of BC anymore, nor have they endorsed me or my use of the information. So it's there, it's available, but they are not buying in terms of my conclusions here. So with that out of the way, I'll talk about the report and what it was used for. So I built a public-facing report that included enrollment information for all of the colleges and universities in British Columbia. I did this twice a year, and it took forever to complete, longer than that, 6 weeks. It took an absolutely just nightmarish amount of time to translate the source data into the reports that we had to put out for the public. I had to manually clean the data in some places and manually prepare the report in Oracle reports. So, you know, as I said at the top of the call, not all reports are done in Excel, not all reports are done manually. Oracle reports did a pretty good job of automating some of the process, but I still had to get in there, roll my sleeves up, and get my hands dirty. And the whole purpose of this report And one of my major gripes with the report is this is something that was public-facing. We're putting this up on our website, and this is supposed to allow the public, students, researchers, concerned citizens, a window into the demographic makeup and the success of our students across our province. And it just wasn't doing it. And let me show you why. This is what we cranked out. This was a 90-page report full of tables like this. So somehow on the sheet, I'm supposed to be able to pull out for an individual college or university how many students they had in a certain age group this year. Is that heading upwards? Is that heading downwards? Is this a cause for concern for my constituents? If I'm a member of the government, or if I'm doing some research, is this a cause for concern? I've got some senior citizens that want to be able to take some courses and they're not be able to do it. How am I going to come to those conclusions from this? There are 3 columns of data here, or 3 sets of columns, and they are 4 different time periods. And there's a split here between the student types that I'm telling you it was only relevant to my internal stakeholders. They are the only ones that really care, is this a domestic student or is this an international student? Yeah, we're publishing a report with that split. They're basically occluding the actual data. Like, the public does not need all this information. There is absolutely a better way that we can summarize this data and publish it in a way that's actually going to drive some research and some decisions. So let's make our business case. For a public-facing report, it was absolutely not designed for the public. It was a painfully manual process to publish this. It needed an automated process and an automated portal for publication. The metrics had been stable for 8 years before I joined the team. Why are we still doing this manually? If we know what our starting point is, we know what our end point is, we know what we're publishing, why not automate this? And finally, if we could summarize all this information on a single screen with some interactivity and some charts and graphs displaying those trends, we're going to vastly outperform that 89-page report. Let's ask our core question again. Is there a better way that these data can be summarized and then expressed visually to better drive our decision-making processes? It's a little different. We're not feeding data to executives. This is public-facing. It's more about, is there a way that we can use these visuals to just provide an accurate assessment of our performance? So a little less information-rich and a little more friendly in terms of, oh, okay, I get what this chart is doing, I get what this graph is doing. Now, there are many, many possible views based on this report. In order to summarize things and make it easy for you, I've chosen one very specific example, which is an institutional snapshot. So there is no way that you're going to flip through those pages and come up with a real nice comprehensive view of a single institution and its results. So do you know what? I'm actually going to show you the dashboard in Dundas dashboard. I'm actually going to flip to our product here and show you what it looks like. So one of my colleagues in marketing graciously agreed to build this dashboard out for me. So this is our platform. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I'm showing you this is a live dashboard. This could be embedded on our organization's website. So I've built an institutional snapshot here for a particular institution and a particular academic year. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we're looking at some demographic distribution. Are we doing, of course, this is a college, so our core group is going to be 18 to 21, but we're out there actively recruiting some of our older citizens to come in and take some developmental courses, maybe learn another language, maybe, brush up on some skills in later life. A breakdown by area of study, so maybe I'm out there trying to figure out where the education programs are across the province and where I might want to enroll, or where, as a concerned citizen, I might want to ask some questions around what's going on here, why aren't there more education students. For Canada, British Columbia in particular, Aboriginal status is very important. There are multiple incentives out there for students of Aboriginal descent in terms of financial and other incentives for them to continue their education. So we want to make sure that as an institution, we're actively showing that we have a pretty good breakdown by Aboriginal status. We're doing the best that we can to contribute to their education. And then just a simple table here showing, at the end of this year we had 130 bachelor's degrees handed out. Remember, this is a college, and in Canada the core focus of the college is not bachelor's degrees. We're more around certificates and diplomas and that ilk, but we still have some bachelor's programs that are out there and students are being successful at. So institutional snapshot summarized in 5 very clean, very simple charts. So very easy to pull out some demographic information and ask some questions of the institutions based on that. And on the right-hand side, I took a stab at making some high-level trends. So let's see, by that program area, for example, we're going to see a breakdown of our enrollments by program area. And as an example, trades, apprenticeships, very hot-button topic, at least while I was involved in education. And you see for this particular college, trades are on trade enrollment, apprenticeship enrollments are on a downswing. That's that neon green line here. That could be bad news. So let's find out what's going on there. As somebody who's involved in apprenticeship, I might want to ask them, what's going on? Are you not offering programs, or are you just not successful? Are you not doing what you need to do to keep people engaged and involved in trades? And down here, just our graduates. Let's make sure that everyone is aware of our success rates. Like I said, there were 1,000,001 different dashboards that could come out of that report. I chose to focus on a pretty simple one that I thought came out pretty elegantly in terms of let's provide the public the window they need into our data. So let me quickly flip back here. So that sums up my presentation. That sums up my examples. So in conclusion, let's go back to my points on what a dashboard is. So it's primarily visual. It's going to have some text and table components if they're necessary. Most often, we're going to focus on a single screen of information just to make delving into the data a lot easier and actually getting that high-level view as quickly as possible. Lots of dashboards focus on interactivity, on drilling through data, drilling through hierarchies to spring out underlying trends and spring out areas of focus that may not be readily apparent. They're designed for at-a-glance monitoring and decision-making. Quickly open a dashboard, and immediately be presented and challenged by the poor performance or the good performance that's going on in your organization. And finally, we'd like to keep them available on a persistent basis. At least in our platform, the portal is up and it's there and it's ready for your end users to consume it when they choose, and not to be a slave to the report creation process. So that's the extent of it. Thank you very much for your time. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, please put them into the GoToMeeting window.